isn't here, you can, or if you want to come and sit so you can see me. I have to find that if I can't see Randy talking, I kind of zone out. So I don't know, do whatever you want, I don't mind. And also, can we give a round of applause to Nancy, who's up there, because she did this on such short notice to help me with the slideshow. So thanks, Nancy. So, I'm Rachel Hearn, for those of you who don't know. And today I wanted to tell you the story of my faith, what it was growing up and how it's evolved since, and where I am now in terms of faith and in relation to the United Church. I think that what happens a lot nowadays is you watch these young kids grow up in the church, and then once they get older, you don't see them again, or you see them very rarely, and you wonder, where was the disconnect there? And I imagine the reasons are different for everybody, and I can't speak for all of them, but I can speak for myself, and I'd like to do that. You as a congregation invested in me growing up, whether that was running the Sunday school program, or striking up a conversation with me at coffee hour, or donating to the church, which in turn goes to things like Worship Loot and Youth Forum and General Council, and so many opportunities I've had because of that. And I feel I owe it to you to be honest about my current relationship with the United Church. I also feel like this isn't something we talk about often, if at all, and it's certainly not something that people have made a habit of talking about during church services, so thank you, Randy, for letting me use this space for that. The sermon Randy had originally planned for today was called Good Bread Makes a Healthy Congregation, bread which could mean conversation or subject matter. The idea behind this was that you're going to have a pretty shallow community if no one is eating good bread, or rather keeping up good communication and being open and honest. So my hope with this was to start a trend where we're eating more good bread together so that we can be closer to one another. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to say is that this is my story, and my story alone. I own it, and I'm not here to speak for anybody else. I'm also not at all interested in telling you what to believe. So when I'm telling you my story today, I'm going to reveal to you some of my beliefs, but that doesn't mean you have to believe them. So if you hear anything that's not true to you, you can just toss it away and don't worry about it. Okay, we're all different, we all have different histories, different biological makeups, different minds. So the things I'm saying, I'm only claiming are right to me, and you get to decide how that information affects you. So let's get started. So growing up, I was really, really into my faith. I had what I would describe as a very fiery, passionate Christianity, which was the product of many things. Firstly, my mother was very open about her faith to us as kids. And as I'm sure a lot of you know about my mom, she doesn't tend to feel really ambivalent about many things. If she's going to be into something, she's really going to be into it. So naturally, her faith was not something that she was ambivalent about, but rather something that she was very passionate about. And so I had that example growing up. My Nana and Papa were also very open about their faith to us as kids. I can recall many talks with Nana about God and Jesus and the Bible and what it all meant. Nana and Papa also took us to church with them when we visited on weekends, and sometimes I would even join them for their daily devotionals that they do in the mornings together. The other influences I had came from the numerous summer camps and daily vacation Bible schools I went to over the years, which included a range of Christian denominations, such as the United Church, Christian Reformed, Baptist, and Mennonite. These programs did an excellent job speaking to young people about faith in a way that was accessible to them, teaching about God's love and Jesus as both a Savior and a teacher. For a young child who was desperately wanting to learn the ways of the world, many of these churches had direct answers to those questions, all of which I picked up happily and without question at the time. As for what I personally believed, there were a lot of things, but there were two main concepts that fundamentally shaped my faith at the time. The first was the Jesus story, and how Jesus was always hanging out with the prostitutes and the tax collectors, people who were deemed unlovable by society. I was really inspired by Jesus' love and acceptance, and I actively tried to emulate his teachings with my classmates at school by hanging out with or sticking up for the kids that the rest of my classmates made fun of or didn't want to hang out with. The second was that we were never alone. That God was always watching over us from heaven, and that we could talk to God whenever we needed, and He would listen to us and care. This belief was the reason why I was such an evangelist at school. I knew some kids might not have the same kind of loving parents or relatives that I had, so I wanted to make sure that they knew. I wanted to make sure they knew that they were loved by God, even if they didn't have that at home. I was happy with this kind of a faith for a really long time. I was challenged only minimally along the way, each time finding a way to make what I had questions about fit into what I believed at the time. Nothing that I came across during my childhood had challenged my faith so far that I felt the need to reconsider what I was believing. This, of course, all changed when I came into high school. There were a number of things that I encountered which challenged my beliefs to the point where, if I had taken the challenges seriously, I would have needed to have reconsidered what I was believing. This is where denial comes in. I spent a lot of grade 9 and 10 being faced with difficult questions about my faith. At first, I was very interested in seeing what kinds of conversations these challenges would bring up. But eventually I could see that they were going a little deeper than I'd anticipated, and I decided to ignore them. I loved my faith just the way it was, and I didn't want anything to change. In an atheist memoir called Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason, Seth Andrews talks about a stage in his life where his faith fell asleep. Something similar happened to me as well. I figured that if I didn't practice my faith and engage with it as much, I wouldn't have to deal with the challenges I was facing. So I stopped praying. I stopped listening to church. I stopped talking about it with my friends. It wasn't that I no longer believed, it was just that I didn't want to think about it like I had been because my faith was becoming something that was a struggle, rather than something that had just happily and easily been there like it had always been. I didn't want this difficult faith, I wanted this happy faith, so I just set it aside to sleep for a while. This, of course, didn't last very long because I was far too subconsciously interested in finding answers and exploring my own faith. The instances that my faith was not asleep during this time were either because I was participating in youth events such as Youth Forum, where I was encouraged to feel good about having a belief and use it to do good things, or because I was struggling with some really hard challenges, like the theory of evolution, this concept that Jesus might not have actually been resurrected, the fact that the Bible was written A, a really long time ago, B, by people and not by God, C, in languages other than English, and that it had been translated by kings and religious authorities, which, as we can see in our history books, weren't always making the greatest decisions in the name of God. On top of all of this was something else that radically changed my belief, and that was the existence of transgender people. For those of you who don't know, being transgender means that you were assigned a gender at your birth, and then later in life you identify as a gender other than that. So some people identify as male or female, but some people identify outside of the binary using terms like genderqueer, gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, etc. Anyways, at this point in my life, I was weary about all this transgender stuff. My struggle with this concept was that if God created us, then that means He gave us these bodies for a reason. So why would any human think they had the authority to change this beautiful, sacred body that God had so purposely given them? Thankfully, this way of thinking was changed for me when I attended a Gay Straight Alliance conference with the Thames Valley District School Board. At this conference, there was a trans man named Brad who spoke about what it was like being socialized to act in ways that were not comfortable for you, and went so direly against everything that made sense to how you feel you should be dressing, acting, and seen by the world. Hearing the hurt in his voice and learning of the sheer amount of time that he spent battling this, which spanned into decades, I could tell that this experience was very real to him, an experience that I couldn't imagine any loving person would hear and say, "You must have just been going through a phase. God doesn't really want this for you." No one would spend that much time of their life being depressed without having experienced something very real and very hurtful. I realized that Brad wasn't trying to challenge God's authority by choosing another gender. He was simply finally allowing himself to be the person that he had understood himself to be since he was a young child. This experience took a huge blow on my faith. I thought, if I could be so radically misinformed about something because of the faith that I had, what other things could I be thinking right now because of my faith that I don't even know about, that have the potential to hurt other people? So I got scared. I no longer trusted that my faith was a good thing, which was extremely confusing considering that I had understood it as a positive thing my entire life. In grade 12, the walls of my faith came crumbling down. For my English class independent study project that year, I ended up reading the memoirs of two Christians turned atheists, and I'll tell you, all those questions I had about God, I got answers for. Answers that made sense to me too. Answers that I was very quickly adopting as my own truth. In a single chapter, everything I believed about my faith was completely shot down, unable to hold itself up. I had been totally shaken and I didn't know what to do. At first, I didn't deal with my transition in the healthiest of ways. I've of course exaggerated my experience up here on this slideshow for dramatic effect. I wasn't like this very outwardly, but inside I often had feelings of anger and resentment. I was angry at people I didn't need to be angry at, people who did nothing wrong. I was mad at my parents, my grandparents, my church, Christianity as a whole. I felt betrayed and hurt, even though nobody had betrayed me and no one ever intended for me to get hurt. It took me a while to realize that I was feeling these things, because I was actually just struggling with sadness. I was mourning the loss of something I had held very dearly to me for a long time. God was no longer real to me. The God that I had confided in night after night as a child. The God I was so excited to meet when I died. The God that I told my friends would always be there. Now, I couldn't even picture that God, and it was really painful. And sometimes it's still really painful. So after a lot of crying and confiding in some of my close friends and doing a lot of reading about those who were experiencing similar things to me, I began to come to terms with my new reality. However, there was still something unfulfilling to me about being just an atheist. I missed having a spiritual aspect to my life. I missed being a part of an institution that encouraged us to see beyond ourselves and create a better world through loving one another. And even though I knew I couldn't go back, I did wonder if it would be possible for me to reimagine a spiritual life in a different way and find a community that could accept someone with beliefs like mine. After going away to school in Toronto with all the resources anyone could ever ask for, I found Unitarian Universalism. And for those of you who don't know, Unitarian Universalism is a religion that has, it doesn't really have a doctrine, but it has a set of 7 principles that they follow, which are up here. The inherent worth and dignity of each person, justice and equity and compassion in relationships, acceptance of one another, and encouragement of spiritual growth, the right to truth and conscience, the use of the democratic process, the goal of world community and peace, liberty and justice for all, and respecting the interdependent web of which we are all a part. And I remember reading that and thinking, So that's it? There's no God or ultimate being, nothing about how the world was made or what happens when we die? And they don't have anything officially set out like that in their church. It was such a relief for me. I was so happy to find a space where I was encouraged to seek out my own spiritual path, whatever that might look like. Learning about Unitarian Universalism also gave me hope that there was indeed a place where I could be a youth minister one day, as I had hoped ever since being involved in youth events with Kathy Douglas when I was in high school. So what is my relationship to Christianity nowadays, you may ask? Well, over the years, having come to terms with my new spiritual path, I have quite often thought about how my Christian upbringing plays into my spiritual life as it is now. What I've come to understand about myself is that I do identify as a Christian insofar as considering myself a follower of Christ in some ways, and that the stories in the Bible are a part of how I live out my faith, even now. However, my spirituality is not confined to Christianity. In the way that I consider myself a Christian, I also consider myself a Buddhist, a Unitarian Universalist, a humanist, an atheist, a scientist, and if there was a religion based around fairies, I would be that too, because I derive inspiration from all those sources to compose my spirituality. So the question becomes, where does that put me in terms of my relationship with the United Church? Well, as I'm sure you know, the United Church is not one to send folks away based on what they believe, especially if they're just members of the church. We have a purposely vague theology to make room for Christians of all sorts of interpretations. But the bottom line is, we're still a Christian church. Again, though, the question could be asked, what does it mean to be a Christian, and therefore, a Christian church? And these questions are asked by people like Greta Vosper. And for those of you who've never heard of this, although you likely have, Greta is an openly atheist minister working for a United Church called West Hill United in Scarborough. Greta is currently in the process of being reviewed because there were some complaints sent to Toronto Conference about whether or not her views were in alignment with the United Church of Canada. The question is then posed, well, what are the views of the United Church of Canada? And is Greta's ministry really against them? Here's a little video about her talking about it.
Seem counterintuitive if the purpose of the leader is to dispense beliefs and to teach belief and to make sure that people are in accordance with belief. But if the purpose of the leader is to inspire, to help people create meaningful lives, to work toward transformation in relationships, then it doesn't matter. So this work in this community could have been led by someone who was a traditional believer. And we could have ended up in exactly the same place. I just happen to not be a theistic believer. And many mainline denominations have been focusing on how you live and not on beliefs for a very long time. So you have social justice movements, you have climate change movements, you have sexuality movements. They're all taking place within liberal Christian denominations, and they're all very, very important. I think that if we are going to continue to use language which suggests that we get our moral authority from a supernatural source, any group that says that can trump any humanistic endeavor, and the understanding something comes out of a pursuit of humanistic values, they can trump that with the divine being. So my argument was, let's try to find other language to talk about this so that we aren't constantly giving that tool to whatever group may want to use it, religious, political, or otherwise. We stay doing this work and we keep doing it in a denomination because we believe that denomination has a responsibility to Christianity, to the human community, to be honest about what the liberal tradition has discovered. And if the cost of that is that we are no longer welcome within that denomination, then it will be because that denomination has defined us out of it, not that we have defined ourselves out of it. Because what we do is very much in accord with what I was taught in theological education and the ongoing development of that thinking beyond denomination.
So how far will you fight this?
Until we either create a space within the United Church for people of all beliefs, or we find that the United Church is not welcome of people of all beliefs.
So there's one way of looking at it. That's her side of it. I've been hearing a lot of criticisms about the situation. Some say that, if she's going to be a minister of a Christian church, you kind of have to believe in a God. And some say that as long as her ministry discusses Christianity and she's encouraging love and creating a better world, then it shouldn't matter what she personally believes. And thankfully, I don't have to make the call on this one. But this situation is exactly the reason why I don't feel like I would be a minister in the United Church. I'm happy that the United Church exists exactly how it does, and I'm not looking to create a space for myself within it in the way that Greta is. I have found my own space to practice a liberal form of religion in Unitarian Universalism, but the UU Church is not for everybody. Some people want something specifically Christian-oriented, and the United Church is doing an excellent job of providing both a very open but still Christian-focused space for those people to do that, and I hope it will continue to be this way. Besides, where else am I going to celebrate Christmas, Easter, Palm Sunday, and all the other Christian celebrations that are a part of my religious life? Just kidding, I know there are lots of other Christian denominations to choose from. I guess I'm just partial to this one. Okay, oh, there was one more page, but it didn't say anything on it. So there you have it. A girl who was once on fire for Jesus and then burning in an atheist rage, and now lights the chalice with the Unitarians, not forgetting where she came from or what she went through. I'm sure it's not the story you were hoping for, where the church gets the girl in the end. But I hope you can see that at least the girl is finally happy where she is now and still comes back to visit often. If I could leave you with anything today, it would be the importance of telling our stories and being unashamed of our past, because at the end of the day, everyone's is different, and there's no shame in that. Thank you for letting me share with you today, and I'm excited to hear the stories you share in the days of tomorrow. Amen.